What's going on, guys? Welcome to the Movement Mindset powered by Station Athletics. I'm Chris Hardenberg here with Joe Passalacqua, here for the first time on episode 22 in our fancy new podcasting room.
We even have
That's all right.
sound canceling panels.
Yes, that's right. So I heard some people say like, oh, it's cool in the gyms. Things could echo, blah, blah, blah. I told you that we were going to have a podcasting room. We have a podcasting room. We have our fancy logo in the
So
background.
pretty. Just so you guys know, that took us 6 months. to
It's
do.
so long.
I hate to say that that's how long it took me.
Well, I know, because you don't like you like moving fast.
Yeah.
But we got it done. We're here. And it's funny, as we're in a podcasting room, it didn't dawn on me until right now that the first episode in the podcasting room is like looking back at like all the screw ups over the last 10 years and how we've bounced back from them. So this episode, guys, is basically like, we've talked a lot, I think, in the first 20 some odd episodes of like what we do, why we do it, how we're structured the way we're structured. And, you know, a lot of what we've learned, and Joe touched on it, and I think the second episode was like, he didn't have like, okay, I go to college and get my MBA, and then I have this mentor who's done it all before me. And no, it was like, I thrust myself into the role. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm gonna outwork and figure out how to do this.
And that was the thought process originally.
Yes.
I'm just going to outwork everybody.
Exactly.
And to be honest, it works to a point.
Yes.
But
then
things happen.
Yeah. So
Which we're going to touch on.
we thought it would be important to be like, all right, let's take a look back so people understand that like not everything, 2-6 gyms has been like without any bumps or
I
bruises.
remember we were at 7.
Right.
So we're on our growth back.
Yes.
At a very aggressive rate.
Yeah.
But these are so important. And if you're a micro gym owner and I guarantee you make mistakes on a regular basis.
For sure.
Right. Or you've made a lot of the same mistakes on a regular basis. So I want to kind of employ the idea that like was constant mistakes.
Yeah.
And there was kind of like, we kind of positioned this 1 through 5.
Yeah.
With like kind of like the big Joe's, what I like to call Joe's biggest fuck ups.
Yeah.
Right. But as long as you're continuing to push forward and you acknowledge the mistake, you can continue to progress.
Yeah. So these are our top 5. But before I get into them, it's funny that you say that because I was talking to Franco, and this is a while back. But Franco runs our Steam location, which was an acquisition, right?
Yep.
We acquired them. And he's like, what's crazy is like, I just looked at you guys as like just knowing everything. And he's like, I just realized you guys try everything and then pick what works. And I was like, yeah, that's business, dude. It's like, you think something's going to work and it doesn't, then you tweak and adjust until it does. So
that's where a lot of problem employees have came from.
Right.
Not understanding they're like, nah, we tried all those things already.
Yeah.
And we don't do them because we tried them and they don't work.
Right. And then vice versa the other way is like, I understand you don't see how this is going to work, but we're not going to know unless you try it and actually give your full effort to see if it will work.
Not half-assed. This is stupid and it's here. I'm not going to push it.
Right.
Or I'm in my head. I'm going to pretend I push something.
Right.
Category sale or how you do an actual sales interview.
Right. So our top 5, first one is going to be standard of work at not enforcing rules. So like
that's basically your job. So
right.
Why don't you run through this?
Yeah. So my thing was when to be fair, and Joe can correct me if I'm wrong. So I was not around for a while, and I started in 2017. The business started in 2014.
You came in on year 3. I
think.
Well,
because Roseland was already there, and I
opened Sparta in 14.
Yes, and so it was 3 years later, give or take.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of it, guys, is like when you have one gym, you know everything that's going on, so you don't necessarily have an SOP, a standard operating procedure built out for how to run a sales consultation. I mean, you literally told me when you hired me, you're like, hey man, I'm gonna be honest, I'm really nervous because I've never hired a salesperson before.
No,
you did all the sales.
That was my job, and that was my position, and I was the best at it.
Exactly.
Right? And inside my facilities,
yep,
I was the best at it.
Yes.
And that's what we kept.
Yeah.
And yeah, people would help. Like Emmy would help a little bit, and Brian did a little bit, only because I was spread so thin.
Sure.
Or like something happened of like, hey, I need you to start this next consult.
Yep.
Right. And people had basic success on it.
Sure.
Right. Even John did it for a while, remember? And the idea there was, it's just hard to let go of something, especially something that drives a tremendous amount of cash infusion into your business.
Yeah. If you don't have good sales, you don't drive people into the building, you can't pay the bills. And then you're super good at it. Like that's something that comes really naturally to you. So I remember when I came in to train, I literally watched Joe do one sales consultation, and he goes to me like, got that? Cool. You got the next one. And I was like, what? So we figured it out. But as you grow, basically we learn in order to grow, you have to then scale up procedures and processes, because the further removed you get, like all the things that are in your head, you can't relay to the next hire of your 6th location, your 7th
because
location.
Because you never wrote it down and
Yes.
you never made a process. Like we have a process here. Let's really simple. We have a process on if like staff is like gonna date each other.
Right.
You know, something as dumb as that. Like you have to set a procedure and a process on how you handle
Yeah.
every single situation.
Yeah.
And we never had that before.
Right.
It was kind of like
we figured it out as we went.
here's the sales schedule. Okay, I have to
Yes.
change you a couple times. Like, you know, sales is a little bit different in the micro gym business because it's really a specific on believing in the systematic approach of what you do within the 4 walls of that gym, as in like the results driven piece.
Yeah.
So if you're in like a micro gym, like small group training, CrossFit style gym, what we've learned is you want people to believe in your program.
Yeah.
And then by just sheer process, that person is going to do better because they understand and they believe that our program is better because of X, Y, and Z.
Right. So then we mapped all that out, right? And it took a lot of time, but then it was like, okay, hey, now that we mapped it out, and the biggest mistake is, again, standard or work of not enforcing rules, is a lot of people who worked for us, and Joe can attest to this, were your friends.
Yeah.
And they were friendly with me, and it was like, it then becomes really hard to say, no, these are the rules. These are the expectations. You have to hit these.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is, it's like, you hear like, hey, why didn't you do X, Y, or Z? It's like, well, I had this and that. And then you're like, okay, that's fine.
I would let people get away with stuff. You
Yes.
know that. I did it for years.
Yes. And then the business suffers. I mean, you sent me, I think you sent me, or I might have sent it to you, an Instagram reel. And it was like a very successful entrepreneur. And he was like, if you have to set up stupid rules for people, then you probably have a bad employee and you're not enforcing the rules good enough. So a great example was at one of our locations, I literally had to tell a coach at the time, like, hey, you got to wear shoes when you coach class.
Do you remember that
Literally
girl?
coached barefoot. She was coaching with no shoes on. And I was like, why don't you have shoes on? And she was like, oh, I don't know. I didn't think. I'm like, you kind of got to wear shoes. And so it's a great example of like if you have to set stupid rules like that, you're probably not enforcing rules.
Well, it's not even just you.
You don't have great employees.
Or you setting an expectation.
Yeah.
Like you setting the expectation, but then that person not understanding why you need to do it that way.
Yes.
That's a problem.
Right.
Right. But what I'm saying is like, how many rules have we embedded? Great example is like, nothing drives me more crazy inside like a class setting when the coach is working out and it overflows into like the class that they're about to coach.
Yeah.
Right. Or when equipment is being used that's supposed to be used for the class because that takes priority.
Right.
And it's not that they're doing it on purpose. They just don't think through enough to understand like, hey, I shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah. And so that's where it came in. Like you said, it's like we let so much slide for so long that I think when we had 7 locations, I mean, we were in a really bad spot. And part of it was like, you're literally like trying to catch water. It's like, I thought we talked about this and we didn't do this. And like, yeah.
We had a franchise that wasn't listening to anything that we were saying.
Right.
Okay. And then we had sporadically a few employees that there was a lot of pushback.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then we had 2 really bad hires.
Yeah. And so then that's what killed us. So, again, to combat that is like, again, if you're a business owner or someone who's running a business, it's like, all right, set the rules in place and make them crystal clear. So it's objective. Like you did X, the rule says this happens. So I don't know what to tell you. This is what happens.
To kind of end that piece, right? I say this all the time. We put someone in charge. Here's a great example. Let's take Mr. Brandino over here.
Okay.
All right. So when Brandon is shooting this podcast, okay, we know that he's the only one that's editing it.
Right.
So if there's something wrong, I know exactly who to point the finger to when something is not done right.
Right.
And it's no different than when a GM isn't doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
Right now, in our current structure, it's either your fault,
right,
or it's Shannon's fault,
right?
Because we set that expectation. If a staff member is constantly doing something wrong, they're late, they're sitting down, they're on their phones during class, it's the manager's fault immediately.
Yeah.
Okay. So my point is the procedures and the process and the rule expectation is for us to be able to handle and like the situation, like on the spot of like, okay, well, this person is doing this. We've spoken to them, but now it's your problem because you didn't correct it because this is part of your job requirement.
Exactly. And that kind of segues well into the second one, which is acknowledging bottlenecks. So if for those of you that don't understand that,
talk about this
all the time.
Yeah.
For those of you that don't understand that term, it's like when you're running a business, just like on the road, there's bottlenecks, right? Where things kind of flow together and things slow down. In a business, there's recognizing we have a situation or an error or an employee here that things are slowing down, there's friction and the business isn't flowing well. And being able to recognize exactly, because more often than not, people who are entrepreneurs, you know what the problem is.
This is a huge
Yeah.
this is like a huge point, especially in our business too, to take leaps and bounds forward.
Yeah, because
Huge.
you have a sense eventually, you figure it out, it's like, okay, I think the bottleneck's here.
Yeah.
And more often than not, those bottlenecks and fixing them require you to make a hard decision or have a hard conversation.
And you and me have both struggled with this.
Yes.
We actually just you and me spoke about this with you recently.
Yes.
About this, right? And it's part of letting go of operational requirements of like what you're responsible for.
Yeah.
Right. That would be like, here's a great example with something I used to do with Chris. I used to call you every single day.
Yeah.
After your sales consults, how did it go?
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Like, why was I doing that? You could have just emailed me and said, hey, I sold this many, I didn't sell this many, or you could have texted me.
Right.
But I wanted to know conversational what's going on in the location.
Yeah.
And I would ask you questions that don't even involve the sales process because I want to know what's going on inside the gyms.
Yeah.
When I don't need to do that.
Yeah.
Because what we have now is Chris sends me reports every single month and then we discuss the reports.
That's it.
And if there's situational things, because I'm in a location, I notice something, we have one-off conversations, but it's allowed me to free up time for me to then focus on other things. Me and Chris we just finished redoing our entire client experience offering.
Yeah.
Right. And me and him spent a lot of time together doing that.
Yeah.
But now I'm stepping myself away from it. He's launching it and he's implementing it into the GMs. And if I see any components of that, I'm going to dive back into that.
Right.
But the like the bottleneck of the business is people think of it as like, oh, like those things affect your top line ability to make more money and revenue within your facilities.
Yeah. Yeah. And we've had issues along the way of like certain locations where it's like figuring out, like one of our locations had a heavy sales issue and it took me a long time to figure it out. And I think years ago, I would have been like tiptoeing around the issue.
Yeah.
Because I'm someone, frankly, just so you got, I hate confrontation.
Mhm.
I'm not very good at it.
It's a skill though.
Yeah. And
To be
it's
direct and separating the feelings from the business.
Yeah.
And this is why we just talked about why, like we said in other episodes, I don't really have like people that I was like real, like who I considered like my best friends at the time. None of them work for us anymore.
well, because for you, it was something that you struggled with. And I think it's okay for me to say this, where it's like, you would let things go because it's like, I think this is a problem, but so-and-so will figure it out. Or you would try to outwork the problem until it got so bad that you were like so frustrated and mad that you'd explode.
Yeah, and people know Joe.
And so now it's a situation where at least you're self-aware enough that if you feel that occurring, you're able to either have that conversation or grab me or grab John and say, hey, this person's in your department. You need to talk to them about X, Y, or Z.
Yeah, it
And
was
then
like the
gets
first time
done.
I said, hey, you got to fire this person.
Yes.
It's an uncomfortable conversation. to have.
Yes.
But you guys have gotten really good at saying, hey, this isn't working out. John as well with what
Yeah.
he does, right? But that's my point, is allowing yourself to understand the bottleneck. What bottleneck did we just talk about recently with you? That where you were stuck.
It was me. I was I think it was right before
It was pretty recent, within
you
the
were
past
like,
couple months.
you have to give more responsibilities to Shannon.
Yes.
because
Okay. So
I'm the bottleneck.
yes. So what we did on our restructure recently, the structure is the GMs.
Yep.
And then it was Chris.
Yeah.
And then it was John and then me.
Yeah.
Right. In that order, you and John kind of
Yeah. We're in the same spot.
working coincide. He's running the marketing and the day-to-day of certain things, and you're running the operations
Yes,
side, right?
yes,
So,
yes.
CEO of media and operations,
Yes.
so you guys work hand in hand. So I had a clear separation of 2 layers
Mhm.
to the GMs because I had you guys.
Right.
So then we added Shannon into the district manager role for our Sussex, Morris County locations, right? Denville, the 2 Sparta, and then what we're adding in the upcoming months, to start handling the GMs.
Right.
And it's a transition. And you were basically, we outlined everything that she did, but like you were still fucking doing half the things.
Yeah. It was like, all right, Shannon, these are your responsibilities, but I'm checking on
And
this.
you and me were having a hard time getting together to be able to focus on what we wanted to do with what we just finished.
Yes.
So imagine you were still doing that. We would have never finished the last 4 or 5 projects that we just recently finished.
Yes. And so that was a big bottleneck, and I was the bottleneck. And then the other one that's frankly was really hard for me, again, not liking confrontation, is how many times did we recognize an employee, like a singular employee was what was holding the facility or the company back.
Mhm.
And mostly me, but sometimes you, but mostly me, it was like, But they did better this week. Instead of just being like, no, they are the issue.
Yeah.
Here's how you need to fix it. And if you don't, it's no harm, no foul, but we're gonna have to go in a different
We just
direction.
did it with the last person that we let go. It was the same exact thing.
Right.
It was like, let's give them another opportunity, another opportunity, another opportunity. And then months go by.
Yeah.
And the outcome is still fucking the same.
Yeah. So
Right?
that was definitely something we've gotten better at. And I think we've gotten much
But something to
better
touch on, no one likes confrontation.
No.
I don't like confrontation
No.
just as much as you don't.
at. Yeah.
Right? But it's understanding the necessity of, hey, this is affecting our direction on what you and me talk about every single day. And we're not going to allow something or someone to affect our ability to go beyond the bottleneck.
Right.
Okay. So that's the whole concept of understanding where the bottleneck is. What can I do to fix it? And then the outcome is always a revenue increase, because that's really what matters in this business.
Well, yeah, because, and I heard this somewhere else, it's like if you don't take care of, let's just use a singular employee. Like if that is the bottleneck, if we don't have a conversation of like, hey, this isn't working out, I'm now accepting that uncomfortable conversation, I'm putting the rest of the company at risk.
Mhm.
So it's like I'm putting one person's feelings above the 40 other people who work for us
Yep.
or whatever. So, and then the third one is actually, it's a little bit of a rocky transition, but the third one is actually a Joe hallmark, is always figuring it out. Like, hey, we're just going to do this and I'll figure out how to do it.
I talked about this in episode number 2, was when John started working with me. He was the first person that I brought on full time. So here's like 101. This is the first time I ever did it. I was like, all right, I hired this guy and I'm like, okay, cool. Now I don't know how I'm going to pay him, but now I'm going to figure it out. And we figured it out just fine. But it was no different when I hired you.
Yeah.
Same exact thing. I don't know how I'm going to pay you.
Yep.
These are the ways. And then we figured it out.
Yeah.
And it worked really, really well for a long time. But what happens is you operate at a pace that is completely uncontrollable.
Yes.
And one fucking mistake can bury you.
Yes.
And that's literally what happened.
Yes.
Was eventually got to the point to where we rushed to hire a salesperson and they ended up crushing us.
Crippling us.
Yeah.
Well,
Because the
because
expectation of what we put on it, and we could only manage the person so much. And we were so afraid to remove this person.
Yes.
Well, I wasn't. You guys were.
I was, yes.
Because you knew what it was going to entail on, okay, we got to start this all over again. He has good intentions, blah, 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 blah. Ended up being total shitbag.
Yeah.
He's never going to listen to this. But yeah, that's what I always did for a long time. And what it does in your head from a business owner perspective is I was right so many times that you're like, oh, my decisions are, I'm invincible.
Yeah.
Right? I always figure it out. Don't worry about it. I'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Right. And then it got to a point where we're like, wow, I'm buried right now.
Yeah.
Okay. So what have we done to kind of review that? A lot of the hiring decisions, we just hired a new executive assistant.
Yeah.
And I didn't meet her until she started.
Right.
So my point is, I gave that job to Chris and John to figure out how that was going to happen.
Yeah.
Okay. When I, from the outside in, see an issue with something, I address it with you guys.
Yeah.
But then it's like, hey, we discuss it. And unless I've already made my mind up on something, this is what we're doing. But I always discuss all the angles because I want to be completely in line with you guys.
Yeah.
Right. So instead of me making a decision saying, hey, this is what we're doing, it's saying, hey, great, we have a process, we have a procedure for this. Have you guys worked through this? This is my 2 cents on what I see.
Yep.
Okay. These are the things that bother me. These are things that really fucking aggravate me.
Yeah.
And these are the things that person maybe does really well.
Yeah.
Or they don't do anything well. Right.
Right.
It just depends. But then I give it to you guys to decide what the process is. If I don't agree with it,
Mhm.
I'm still going to make a decision, but I take the input because it's your guys' job,
Right.
right? And you guys, and how many times do I say, Chris, I don't really agree with that, and this is why, and then you're like, oh, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Because the only people in our business that understand from a numbers perspective are literally you and me.
Right.
No one else looks at the KPIs and the growth patterns, membership growth. They do the reports, but they don't look at those things.
Well, they don't look at it across the whole. So like they might know their specific gym, but how does that gym fit into the entirety of the whole
No,
machine?
because for us, I was literally talking to somebody this morning about this, on how easy it is to operate with 6 locations now.
right.
Unbelievably easy. Because when we hire a new person now, let's say it costs $150 at each location to contribute to hire that new person. That's really easy to do. So now we're in the position to where it's like we can grow at leaps and bounds. But the perspective was, in the beginning, I was making every decision, and you need to separate yourself from things that are monotonous where like they don't really matter.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is when you're small, right, you can just make a decision. And if it doesn't work out, and for those of you that don't know Joe very well, it's like he works a lot. And so it just became like, oh, well, I'll outwork the problem.
And that's it always,
And it worked out.
but it always worked. But you get to a point in any business
yes.
to where we talk about this. It's a lot of people don't know this. Amazon as a company lost money for like 2 decades.
Okay.
And they started to make money when eventually because they operated at a loss,
Right.
because they sold items so low.
Right.
Just so everyone knows now, Amazon is not the cheapest place to buy things.
Sure.
Okay. But what they did was they basically outworked all their competitors, and their prices were so low that eventually, by default, by volume, eventually your prices get so low that eventually you make money.
Yeah.
Right. It's no different with that, like that philosophy.
Right. But again, it's like the business just got to the point where it's like, okay, hey, in order for you to be a true CEO and not involved in the day-to-day, you have to pull back. And as the business grows, if you continue to make shotgun decisions, not you, but just in general, if we continue to make shotgun decisions, now the ripple effect is like, could be really bad.
And I know my decision is, at the end of the day, the final decision.
Exactly.
But, and I know you agree with me on this, is I tell you all the time, Chris, don't ask me that fucking question. You know how to handle that.
Yep.
Right? And you've gotten the last 6 months
Way better.
way better. Everyone has, actually.
Yeah.
Shane's gotten better at it. I deal with Courtney on a daily basis because I'm here, right? She's gotten a lot better at it, right? Like, we don't even bother Haley because I know that her decisions are proper. And if she doesn't know something, she always does ask.
Yes.
But it's like even Quan, dude, like him too. Like everyone's making good decisions because they understand and they're starting to buy in more.
Yes.
Right. But I guess kind of like the piece that I kind of want to end with that piece of like the decision making of like, okay, we're just going to do it and figure out first. It allows you to grow at an absolute rapid pace.
Yeah.
If you're like me from a personality set, like I'm going to accomplish this at all costs.
Yeah.
Okay. And that does work, but to go to where you and me want to go, to be at 10 locations at the end of next year, which we're on track to do very aggressively.
Watch out,
sneak peek. The perspective is I need to know my place.
Yeah.
And you need to know your place.
Yeah.
And everyone else needs to know their place.
Yeah.
So like my place now as the acting CEO is I look at something that I want to enhance, but then I work with the person that's supposed to be in charge of it.
Yeah.
And they're in that position already because I trust them.
Yeah.
I'm not hiring a new person and be like, okay, I hope this
really works out.
Because imagine I hired someone and I hated them. I would probably kill them.
Not work well.
Yeah, it just wouldn't work well.
Yeah.
Right? But that's kind of the point there is separating the decision making and don't make sporadic choices on things.
Right.
And not necessarily thinking things through, because the flip side of this is, we talked about this, how if you don't make a decision, it's just as bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay? Sporadic decisions are bad.
Right.
Dwelling on a decision, in my opinion, is even worse.
Yeah. So you got to thread the middle.
Yes.
Yeah. And so that's what I think we've gotten better at. But that kind of segues really well into the other one, was letting go. So letting go of responsibilities and
we
a
touched on it.
stranglehold.
Yeah. We basically went through letting go already, right? Like the just to like touch on that for 10 seconds. It's understanding that my time requirement is no longer valuable here. And I talk to a lot of people in this business of like, when you own a singular location of any business, laundromat, deli, micro gym, whatever it is, when you own a singular location, you 99.9% of the time, you are an owner operator.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
By definition. So that means within those 4 walls, you're the general manager, you're the coach, you're the salesperson, you're the cleaner, you're everything.
Yeah.
Okay. So understanding when I let go of, I'm no longer coaching a class because I get just as good of quality paying someone $25 an hour, and my time is better spent in the sales office where I'm making a potentially $300 to $500 in 1 hour or a 30-minute session. That's where my value is.
Right.
And understanding, okay, now when I let that go, this person's filling, and now what am I doing to then increase my hour value?
Yeah.
While still making money doing those 2 things.
Yeah.
And continuing to just go up the ladder.
Yeah. And it's having, again, it kind of goes back to being able to trust the people you hire, which in my opinion, and I hope people agree, I think you're in a spot right now where you've never been better at trusting the people that
honestly, and I've never been better at my job right now.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like this is the best I've ever been from a functioning, I guess the best way to put it is for me applying the time that I can donate to the gyms.
Yeah.
I feel what I'm donating and pushing forward has been the most enhancing piece that I've ever been able to do.
Absolutely. And then the last one is hiring too fast, which again, we've touched on a little bit, but just to dive in a little bit deeper is like this one in particular, I think outside the other ones, those are like a slow burn. Like they hurt the company over time because you delay. Hiring too fast and hiring the wrong person when you are small, as we know, can straight up cripple a business. And so we touched on
One person can
literally.
completely destroy the internal pieces of your business.
So like I remember there were two salespeople in particular. I'll never forget the first one actually. We needed to hire a salesperson because for Roseland because I needed to remove myself.
Mr. Mike.
Yeah. And so I'll never forget Joe, I'm on the floor rolling out or something like
we
that.
had, I mean, and we're 7 locations deep right now.
Yeah. And so Joe literally comes up to me and goes, "Stop interviewing. I got the guy." And I was like, "Oh, we do?"
Yeah,
And that was one.
I know
interview.
Adam's going to listen to me, you asshole. Thanks a lot, bro.
He's like, "He's a referral. Great interview. He's hired." And I was like, "Great." Like I didn't know any better.
We had like 8 people in the waiting room.
Yeah, yeah. And for the first 2 months, I was like, "This guy is friggin' done."
I think
like,
he sold like 33 people his first month, and then it was like 28 the next month. Like we were rolling.
And then all of a sudden, I have people coming up to me like, "I don't know what I signed up for."
Yeah.
And I'm like, "What?" And then all of a sudden, people are falling off by the wayside. And I'm like, "What is going on?" And then he's not showing up
Our
to work.
Christian was like over 10%.
And we've never had
within
that.
like a few months after that. Yeah.
So then we're like, okay, cool. That stunted us. That hurt us. And we had to get rid of him. And then we hired the next one. Again, you interviewed him and you're like, "I think this is the guy, but I don't want to screw it up. Chris, do an interview." So I did one interview. I was like, "Great interview. You're hired."
Mhm.
And it's like, he crippled us even more because that's actually when we opened the 7th one. We opened Madison. He ran the
Right.
pre-sale
Right.
and it was not good. And so now we're in a process where we learn from that. Like, again, you just said we hired an executive assistant. We took a month to hire an executive assistant.
So something I was going to slingshot on this is our sales process. If I was interviewing, I would hate it so much.
Yeah.
Because it's so long,
The interview process.
the interview process. But we've done it like that before because when we've changed it is like we haven't had a bad hire in a
A
while
while.
because it's been the process and the expectations and really understanding the person. And now I understand big businesses when you go, like I used to get really pissed off when I would go interview at pharma or medical device jobs where they'd be like, I'd be on like my 4th interview. I'm like,
Yeah.
what the fuck?
Yeah.
Like what is this shit? Like,
Yeah.
can you like, but now I get it.
Right.
Right? Because what happens is you put one bad person and it doesn't affect you right away. It affects you 6 to 8 to 10
Yes.
months later.
Right.
And I talk about that all the time in the business. Any sales business, I always tell when people are like commission only, if you take your foot off the pedal for 30 days, it affects you 60 days later financially.
Yeah.
And then it takes you another 60 days to catch back
Catch
up
back
again.
up. Exactly.
Right? So like that's my whole point of this conversation is like when we started doing this and laying out the expectations, we're able to make decisions really, really fast because we know and we believe we have the right person because of how much time we spent.
Well, and we had to learn that the hard way.
Yeah.
Like those 2 hires in particular, and it sounds crazy to say that, but it's 100% true. Those 2 hires in particular hurt us so badly that like we were like, we got to change something. I mean, even for Station Road, Courtney will joke like it took us a month to hire her.
Yeah, we've known Courtney for 5 years.
But
Yeah.
but the way we look at it is exactly what Joe said. We've been burned and hurt so bad and set the business back so far because you hire someone, you take time to train them, then they start working, and then
Remember we hired Leah?
yeah,
We trained that girl. And then it's like, oh, I'm going to Boston. I'm going back to school. It
Yeah.
was like 3 days after she
Yeah,
was done
yeah.
with her internship.
so it's like the same thing. It's like it sets you back so far. So all right, so that takes care of hiring too fast. And then one thing I realized we forgot to touch on is letting the opinions of others affect your decision making.
Oh, there's a huge one for me.
Yeah.
Right. Something that I struggled with my whole life and a lot of people do is the perspectives of others affect not just your decision making, but your process of what you want to achieve.
Yeah.
Okay. It's the whole idea of everyone cheers for you on the way up. And
Yeah.
as soon as you get there, everyone just fucking hates you.
Yeah.
Because you did something in reality that they didn't do.
Right.
Right. And that's the whole thought process there is you deal with that on a regular basis. And it's really eye-opening to see like, oh, was that person like really into what I was doing? Or were they really hoping that you were going to fail doing it?
Right.
Okay. And so how that can affect your business is it affects your decision-making ability because you're too worried about what people think or what they might chit chat behind closed doors about what you're doing. But at the end of the day, you want to be striving towards what your accomplishment is in your head. So for you and me, we have a very clear picture of what that is.
Right.
Okay.
That's something I've heard some people talk about. I was at a conference one time and Damon John spoke and he was like, you know, the question was like, what is a lesson you learned? He's like, I never take criticism or from anyone I wouldn't take advice from.
Correct.
And I'm only going to take advice from people I trust who have been there before. And so it's like, same thing. It's like, you start running a business and someone's like, oh, you shouldn't do that. You should do this. And you're like, oh, I guess I should
Did you know
do
any people
this.
told me that? But literally people, I had my own family tell me that's dumb. Don't do that.
Yeah. But then you look at it and it's like, as you go through it and you have the wisdom and you look back, it's like, man, this person was telling me this because either they were afraid for me or B, they thought it would be a good idea for them, but this person's never run a business before, or they've run a business and it's never been a 6-location business. So it's like, why would I let that opinion
A
determine?
lot of gym owners were
doing
like
something?
that when I
Right.
first started, right? They're like, oh, you're doing what? What do you know about this?
Yeah.
You know, joke's on you, clowns. But seriously, like I like to talk on that a lot because it's something that really affects people. And I think it gives people a lot of anxiety and emotion.
Oh yeah.
When it's letting go the thought process of like, not everyone's going to like you. Not everyone's going to like your decision making. Not everyone's going to like how you set up X, Y, and Z, right? Just, you know, strive forward to what you want. And that's
Right.
really all that
And
matters.
focus on the vision and the purpose that you have.
Correct.
Yeah. So guys, those are the 5 biggest mistakes we've made over the last 10 years. Again, we wanted to let people in behind the curtain of like, decision making isn't perfect, but what's allowed us to continue to strive forward and affect people's lives around fitness has been being able to learn from these things. So, you know, hopefully if you were a business owner, it's something you could maybe avoid. And if you're not a business owner, maybe it's something you took away from it to apply to your own life. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being in the new podcast room with us. And we'll see you at the gym.
Peace.